everyone, welcome back to Rolling Solo. My name is Adam Smith, and as you can see from the title of the video, we are talking about the top 20 solo board game expansions from 2020 as voted on by the Rolling Solo Facebook community. So what's really exciting with this list is going to have us go back to some of those awesome games that we've really been into for either a year or even longer in some cases. So it's going to be nice to go through this list, as many of these are going to be games that are either sitting on your shelf already in terms of the core experience, or potentially might be games on your wish list, or games you've already tried and maybe passed on that you might want to come back and revisit if an expansion has made the experience better, right? And that happens. That really does happen. So what I'm going to talk about first before we dive into that list is, first off, you're probably noticing things are a bit more zoomed in than they were for the prior list. So I do want to apologize for that. My first kick at the can with this, it was a little bit tougher to see what I was doing on screen here as things were smaller. I've gone ahead and boosted that up quite a bit. So at this point, you definitely should be able to see whatever it is I'm going to be moving around on Board Game Geek as we go through this list. The other thing is, I noticed a huge influx to the Rolling Solo board game community on Facebook. That is awesome. So if you haven't actually joined us up there, definitely jump in. We have a giveaway as well. You can find a video for that on the channel. That giveaway goes all the way to the end of this month, the end of the year essentially, for a whole bunch of board games. So if you're not in on that, find that video on the channel. It's within the last month or so that it came out, and definitely get your entries in for it. The Discord channel also is another great place to check out, and my Patreon as well. So there's a number of different spots you can go check out. But long story short, we are here today to talk about those top 20 solo board game expansions. So we're going to start with position number 20, work our way all the way up to 1, and see who sits on the top. Starting off our list, in the 20th position is Tiny Towns Villagers, as voted on by the Rolling Solo board game community. And if you remember from last year, Tiny Towns, the original base game, obviously, in this case, was one of the games that was on a number of my lists from last year as a great solo game. You check out the community's thoughts in Board Game Geek in terms of the best way to play or the recommended way to play. Solo actually got a good chunk of votes overall as being a great way to play the game. So what this expansion back here for Villagers is going to do is add new inhabitants to the city. Of course, that's going to have trickle effects. Creatures are going to have extra talents. You've got engineers and merchants, as it mentions here. This really is a great summary right here of what you can expect to find inside the box. So you got some lodge boards, some villager meeples, buildings, monuments, and extra villager cards. So if you're looking for a game that's small on the footprint, small on the weight side of things, and you want a little extra, Tiny Towns Villagers might be worth checking out. Coming in the 19th position on the list is Aeon's End Outcasts. And yes, this game continues the expedition system that was introduced in the new age of Aeon's End. It allows players to replay all the content they have in a short campaign format. So that's one of the reasons why this one landed on this list. Show you some pictures. I actually talked about this one at a high level in the last top 15 video, where this game actually landed as well, because this game can be played standalone, but also can be mixed and matched with other content from Aeon's End as well, as I just mentioned. So it's pretty flexible that way. And again, the artwork in this game and the amount of content and cards, of course, is ridiculous. It's always got tons of cards, as this thing is going to be all about card draft. That's its primary mechanism across the board, but this sits safely in the 19th position. Next up, in the 18th position, we have Seven Wonders Duel Solo, and that is the expansion here. And honestly, I've played Seven Wonders Duel before, but I have not gotten a chance myself to try this solo mode out, although I did remember hearing about it. So I'll show you guys a couple pictures here, and we'll just go with this because I don't actually have any information to provide you, as I haven't tried this one. But I would love to hear from the community that has actually given this a shot. Do you enjoy this one? Because it showed up on the list for these top 20, so it obviously is pulling people in. And again, because it's a solo expansion, you can, of course, only play it solo, but it does look like it aims to try to fill that gap, being that the original game itself was duo, which is a duel between two people, of course. So that's kind of nice that they open that up for solo players as well. But let me know in the comments what you think about it overall. Moving on to the 17th position, we have Cartographer's Ambush Mini Expansion. And honestly, this is going to be the smallest expansion on the list. Literally just 4 cards. These 4 cards are ambush cards you're going to add into your ambush deck, and that's literally it. And it's going to give you some new monster shapes overall. Now, I will show you because, again, this is just 4 cards. There's not much really to see on this page. I'll give you another shot of those cards. You can see them again. But if I head back to the actual base game, which I'm going to try to do for every one of these entries to ensure you guys know and see what the game is like, or at least rated as. You can see here 7.8 what the ratings for, but if you take a look at what the community is saying is the best way to play, Solo's doing pretty good. 112 votes overall, and the large majority is on the recommended to best side of things. So this is definitely one that you want to check out. It's also rated very highly as a family game, and overall 140 is pretty good. Next up in the 16th position is Hostage Negotiator Career. I got to tell you right now, if you're looking for a solid solo game, there is so much content to consume from Hostage Negotiator. You can just go through Board Game Geek. There is tons of extra stuff, but this expansion really ties together a campaign in a really cool way. It's going to basically add in the ability to pull kind of a narrative card per year as you go through the career of a hostage negotiator, of course, based on this title. And that narrative that's kind of happening in between each of those years is going to have effects on the whole thing overall. A really good sum up of the thing can be found down here in the description. So you can definitely pause to read this, as it will tie everything together in your head quite nicely. But it does require that you have the Hostage Negotiator base game, Crime Wave, and it says multiple abductor packs to play. But I recommend that even if you're just looking to dip your toe into this one, just going with the base game of Hostage Negotiator to start and then moving through it all the way up to career is also a good way to go. But as you can see, the best is the most recent content for this game, and it's pure solo. In the 15th position, we have a heavyweight, Anachrony Fractures of Time, and this is releasing this year. I don't actually have this expansion just yet, but I can tell you that this is a awesome solo game. And I'm talking about the original game of Anachrony, so I can only imagine Fractures of Time is going to ramp that up. I've been really excited to get what's coming to me from the Kickstarter when it finally delivers to me. I'm in Canada, obviously, so sometimes I'm not exactly getting those things as quick as everybody else is, but it looks utterly fantastic, and I can't wait to get my hands on this. So when I saw this on the list from the community, I was like, good job. You guys picked wisely. I do have to apologize a little bit because as I'm blowing these images up to a larger size, they are losing a little bit of their clarity in some shots. But yeah, you get the gist of this one. In terms of what's included, I would need a lot longer to actually break this down for you guys. So the description on Board Game Geek will give you that in full, but this is a high recommendation from me. The base game is extremely well received, and as a solo game, again, overwhelmingly positive in terms of the best or recommended way to play. In the 14th position on the list, we have Folklore: The Affliction from Greenbrier Games, and this one, and I just realized now, you're not going to be able to go by this button right here. I think some of them say that I have the game in the collection, some of them don't. Please don't use that as an indicator as to what I actually have and don't have, because I don't keep it updated very well at all. Now, sometimes I click this thing, sometimes I don't. I actually have Folklore: The Affliction Fall of the Spire. I haven't been able to play it just yet, and that's because I'm just being safe. There were some issues with manufacturing when it delivered. And in terms of, there was some, I don't want to use the wrong terminology here, but essentially it was like a mold or something along those lines. It was mainly on the inside of the game box itself. So it wasn't Greenbrier's fault. It was the manufacturing process and stuff like that. And the box getting damp or being stored in a damp area. And then because of that, when these games delivered, I didn't actually dig into them. I kind of siloed them off from everything else in my collection. I'm waiting further instructions, but my understanding is Greenbrier is doing a fantastic job of reprinting the components that were affected by this and testing it, making sure that they're making the right calls on this. So I feel really bad for them because I'm sure this thing was going to be a knockout, and it still will be. It's just going to have a bump in the road that not many projects have to deal with. And they're doing a great job handling it because I'm sure it's not easy. But long story short, deserves to be on the list. Folklore is a great game. The solo community really loves it, which is why I'm kind of spending a little extra time on this one, being that it had such a bumpy road to delivery. But yes, this is a game that if you're interested in a very story-driven narrative experience, this game is going to be for you. In the 13th position, we have Tapestry Plans and Ploys, an expansion for Tapestry, of course. We'll jump back to that. So you can see it's rated 7.5. If I take a look at the solo count here, it's pretty heavily recommended on the solo side of things. And weight-wise, it's an average weight, a little bit above average in terms of difficulty and things like that. But if you want to know more about the actual expansion, I'm probably the wrong person because I have not played this one. It says it adds a new card type, new miniatures, new civilizations, and more. And the description's pretty thin on Board Game Geek as to what this thing actually does. So you're going to need to dig a bit to find the information you need, but there's other videos here you can check out to get that information, I assume. But for me, can't say too much more about this one, but it's on the 13th position. In position number 12, we have Root, the Clockwork expansion. It says face off against automated factions from the base game, either competitively or cooperatively. I can tell you right now, this game on the outside, if you know nothing about it, most people know what Root's all about now. It looks cute and cuddly. I can tell you on the inside, the game mechanisms, the actual design of it, and how they handled this Clockwork expansion for solo players, it's awesome. Cannot recommend this thing enough. This is a fantastic choice by my community. And you can see here for Clockwork expansion, obviously because it's all talking about automated factions, obviously best way to play is solo in this case. For the original game, it's just as highly rated as the solo expansion. It's extremely highly rated as a war game. And that's what I was going to say. It's cute and cuddly, but this thing is a war game at its heart. It has tons of strategy involved. And complexity-wise, it's more complex than you'll expect from a game. When you look at this box on the shelf, you wouldn't assume it'd be this heavy. And 3.65 is not really crazy heavy, but it's heavier than the average by a good shot. So taking a look at the original Root experience, it was really not recommended to play this solo. I mean, you might play solo just to get a gist understanding of the game, but the whole purpose of that Clockwork expansion was to allow for those automated factions to work, so that you can actually have a solo game and have it competitive or co-op. It's so good. In the 11th position on the list, we are so close to the top 10 here. We have Robinson Crusoe Adventures on the Curse Island Treasure Chest. That's exactly what this thing is, and I literally picked this up maybe a week or two ago. I haven't dug into it yet to get a true understanding for myself, but my community's already rated this high, and it's of no surprise. Robinson Crusoe has major staying power and has been a kind of pillar in the solo gaming community for a long time, and also a pillar in terms of the pain and suffering that you will go through trying to win this game, but it makes it so satisfying when you pull it off. And it's just a fantastically designed game that every time content comes out for this thing, it's one of those solo games that I always consume everything. Can't stop. And I don't think there's many solo games or solo gamers out there that would argue with me on that front. It's one of the best. So if we want to jump back to the original game itself, it was rated 7.8. Complexity it's up there. And then of course, solo just is huge. It's insanely lopsided how many people love this thing on a solo side. I've played this actually 2-player before, and I didn't enjoy it as much. I found that the solo game really was the way to play this game. And you can see overall in thematic, it's way up there and is way better than First Martians. We have officially made it to the halfway mark in the video, and the next one is the 10th position as we climb up to the first. We have This War of Mine, Days of the Siege, and this is an expansion for This War of Mine, the board game, and this game is phenomenal. As a solo game, you guys got to try this. And sure, the game may not be for everyone, and some people may not enjoy the experience of it being gritty and real and true to its source material. But at the end of the day, this is an experience that's unlike anything else out there in general in terms of the weight of the situation and choices that you have to make throughout this game. Days of the Siege just layers it on even more with additional content. So you're going to expect to find a whole bunch of new stuff here. And I, could try to sum this all up, but it's probably better if you go ahead and take a look at the description yourself. Again, most of these games I mentioned on this list are going to be well known. So they're additional content for games that are beloved. Going back to the original This War of Mine, the board game, even though it could be played up to 6 people, solo was the way to play this game unanimously as the best way. And I 100% agree with that. And it has staying power. This thing is going to be around for a while. 9th position is all about role player fiends and familiars. So bonding with animal familiars and banish dangerous fiends is what you'll be doing in this expansion here. It says players can add more depth to the hero by adding a familiar to their character. Creatures can add more options, and a brand new set of monsters, of course. Different classes and market cards. You need to have role player, as with all these games, the core games required. It's 8.2 rate, and that's very high. There's not many people that have voted in this camp, but solo seems to be winning out overall. The one thing that shocked me with this one was actually going back to the base game and seeing that the actual community believes that 3 player is the best for this. I'm not, and this of course is overall on Board Game Geek. I just assumed that that solo would actually win this one out, but it's just as good of a game with other people as it is solo as well. But you can see overall, most people on the solo front anyway recommended it as a recommended way or best way to play. I do recommend this one for sure, and that expansion was a solid choice. Number 8 is where we find ourselves right now for Arkham Horror 3rd Edition, Underdark Waves. In my opinion, this expansion that came out this year is the best of the 2 expansions available for the game currently. If you actually take a look at the base game for 3rd Edition and then check out expansions down below, you'll see there's Recursive Echoes coming in the future. Underdark Waves is the one that's currently most recently released. Dead of Night was the one before it. I still think out of the 2, Underdark Waves is the best of the 2 expansions. It adds a ton of stuff. It says 150 encounter cards, along with new assets, monsters, conditions, terror mechanics. I mean, this is typically how the Arkham Horror and Eldritch Horror thing goes. Once the base comes out, these expansions just start adding tons of additional content to the point that the game really gets flushed out. There's lots and lots of variability in the game. The coolest thing that I found, though, is mentioned actually at the bottom of the description, too. It says that it boasts a treasure trove pulling you into some of Cthulhu mythos' most compelling tales. And that's the piece that is the coolest for me, is that it just takes you out of the town of Arkham, essentially, and pulls you into areas like Kingsport and Innsmouth and things like that, and pulls you along into the tales that I think are the most interesting. So this is definitely a recommendation for sure. And the community picked very, very well on this one too. The 3rd edition is a great edition. There's a lot of people that love the 2nd edition still, and I do too. There's something about that artwork and about the game itself that makes it feel like it's just trying to consume your soul the whole time you're playing. And there's something to say for that too. But there's something real special about the 3rd edition. I think the nicest thing that changed with the 3rd edition is, and I currently have the base copy, but it has the white trim around the tiles. So these tiles are now much better. If you buy 3rd edition now, you won't see white trim around the edges of this thing, which made it look absolutely terrible. But now they've gone ahead and kept the artwork as the focus instead of it looking like a cookie cutter kind of thing. Just imagine this whole tile with every line having white around it. You know, the edges plus these dividing lines. Like, it just looked, it destroyed the whole darkness feel, and it turned it into something that I don't even know how to explain. But I'm glad they fixed it. So they obviously must have gotten enough complaints to change the printing on it. But the downside is my version has white trim, and now I need to get rid of it and get the most recent version. All right, number 7, The Lord of the Rings Journeys in Middle-earth Shadowed Paths expansion. I absolutely love this game because I'm a huge fan of Mansions of Madness and what Journeys in Middle-earth did by moving away from dice and heading into the card side of things. Was different, and that was different enough for me to jump into it. Plus the fact the IP is Lord of the Rings, you can't go wrong with that. It included it was one of the better, bigger box expansions for the game. There's actually quite a few expansions, but some of them are smaller packs. So let me actually go back to the base game here, and I'll show you guys what I mean by that. We've got see these Dweller in the Darkness figure packs and things like this. They're smaller, kind of drip feeding of some enemies to add into your campaigns that will then be called upon by the app. But the Shadowed Paths expansion, the one that was chosen by the community here, is, you know, got the big time dump of characters. Gandalf shows up, the Balrog shows up. So a lot of characters that people were like, finally, these are the ones I really want to play. I wanted these in the first version, the core box, but you can only slam so much stuff in there, I guess. Long story short, I like this game a lot, and it stays in my collection. It's not going anywhere. Good choice by the community on this one. It deserves to be in the 7th position, and it's extremely highly rated, and doesn't have too many votes overall. But if I go back to the original core game, in terms of play, yeah, 2 people's probably as high as I would ever do with this one, but you'll see solo's where it's at. The 6th position belongs to Arkham Horror, the card game. It's an LCG for all the expansions that came out in 2020. As you can see, there's a ton of expansions. So I'm not going to pick just one. I mean, I have to technically, so you guys have something on screen to see, but there's too many to choose from here and even talk about. I personally love the game. This is a great choice by the community. And I thought it'd make a lot more sense to just lump all the expansions for this one. into one entry, so it didn't become kind of unruly in terms of the list. And I honestly think that it's sitting in the 6th position for year 2020 for Arkham Horror the card game, when the base game came out in, was it 2018? Where am I blind? Where is the date on this thing? 2016. Oh my gosh, it's even older than I thought. Yeah, like that's pretty good. 4 years old and to still be up in that, upper tier for expansions, that's pretty solid. Goes to tell you that this thing's got staying power, just like Lord of the Rings, the card game did. And Marvel Champions is kind of moving in that same direction as well. We'll see how long it lasts. But I don't think Fantasy Flight Games has ever really had a dud on the LCG side of things. Every time they've released one, if you're into whatever it is they're releasing, you will enjoy it. It is usually well designed and a lot of fun. So, long story short, can't even try to sum this one up in words. There's a lot of stuff to check into with Arkham Horror, the card game, but definitely a solid choice from the community. We've now reached the top 5 of the list, and we have in the 5th position Too Many Bones Splice and Dice from Chip Theory Games. This is a weighty expansion, 4.33 to 5. That is pretty heavy. Now, this expansion is going to allow you to create your own tyrants using baddies from your Too Many Bones base games and add-ons. You build a tyrant along your standard-sized games, or standard games, I should say, or you can work for Novulus outside of a Too Many Bones game and then port your creation in later. The mats for this are really nice. You can see that they've obviously brought in some things from Cloudspire with this one, where they've got like the notches there with the pins. Again, I will heap the praises on Too Many Bones until I die. I think the game is fantastic. Back in 2017, when I actually went ahead and backed it, I wasn't sure whether or not this thing was going to stick it out in the long run until I got it. And then I played it, and I played a couple games, and by about the 3rd game, things just started clicking, and it went from being like, I like this, I like what it's trying to do, to like, I am obsessed with this. I think that's kind of one of its barriers, is that it's not an overly heavy game, but if you don't give it, a few plays where you try different gear locks, you then start to appreciate the beauty of its design once you start trying different gear locks. If you stick to just one and you play the same one a few times in a row, especially if it's one of the more kind of like entry level gear locks to kind of help you into the game, like maybe like patches, for instance, where it's just all about healing mainly, you might kind of go, I get this isn't exciting. There's not enough here. But once you start using the other characters, you start realizing that like each of these characters are extremely deep and have a whole bunch of strategy behind them. Not even talking about what's going on the battle mat and all the tyrants you have to deal with, and the baddies and how they can affect things. But the characters themselves that you're playing are just crazy. So I could heap praises on this thing all day. This is a great choice. Anything that comes out for Too Many Bones, I imagine is going to be in at least the top 10, because it's been so adored by the solo community. But long story short, definitely deserves to be in this list for an expansion for Splice and Dice in the 5th position. Let's move on to the next one. In the 4th position on the list is Tainted Grail, The Fall of Avalon, and it's actually pertaining to Wave 2, the delivery of stretch goals and the Red Death campaign. So if we go to expansions here, we go through, you'll see Age of Legends is 2020. There's actually a number of different things. So Echoes of the Past, although some of the stuff is miniature specific versus content specific, but Red Death, for instance, is a good example. But yes, people are very much awaiting this Wave 2 stuff to come, and some people have already gotten it. Now, I am in Canada. I haven't gotten this yet, so I can't even speak to this. I do have the original Tainted Grail, but this is very anticipated by people that played the original and loved it, and is still extremely popular as a solo game. So I'm looking forward to this Wave 2 landing in the near future for me as well. But this one, in terms of my experience with it, highly thematic. Definitely agree with that. And overall, it's been climbing up the charts quite steadily. And the best way to play, hands down, in my opinion, is solo for this one, as it shows right here. It does mention that 2 is also a good option, but I truly believe like Awakened Realms has been coming out with games recently that really cater to solo gaming as like the best way to play. You can play these games with other people, but when you go down that narrative path where, that's where everyone kind of wants to control the narrative. And if you have, the more people you have at the table, the less overall control you really have in terms of the outcome of what that narrative is going to end up looking like. Whereas when you're playing solo, you are in full control of your choices and decisions, and nobody else is going to tell you otherwise. And that's why I love solo games. So this is a great one. Again, more so on the expansion side of things, of course, because that's what this list is for the 2020 content. But highly rated at number 4. And we've reached the top 3 of the list. And in the third position of that top 3, we have Spirit Island Jagged Earth from Greater Than Games. This one is a very weighty expansion at 4.36 out of 5. The original Spirit Island's around 4. Yeah, it's actually bang on 4. And it came out in 2017. So a lot of people know about this one. This one was similar to Too Many Bones in its release. The first year was, people were noticing it. It wasn't getting tons of traffic. But then like 2018, 2019, these things started to ramp up. Same with Too Many Bones. It seems to be getting more popular as time goes on. Same with Spirit Island. It's like the recognition's finally coming in for these ones that were originally kind of like, hey, look at these things. They're pretty awesome. They play extremely well solo. And now it's like, okay, these things are a hot commodity at this point. Now, for me personally, I haven't actually dug into the Spirit Island Jagged Earth stuff yet. I do have it all. I got everything from the Kickstarter, and you can see here it adds a ton of stuff, but I haven't gotten to it yet. I think the only downside to Spirit Island in terms of the gameplay side of things is that the game design is amazing, and when you're playing it, you're like, "This is fantastic! It's so well designed, and it's interesting, and it's brain burny, and all this kind of stuff." Is it a fantastic game? Yes. At the number 2 position, this is like the feel good expansion of the year, in my opinion. Like, this thing just made me smile. Like when I heard this was coming out, I was excited. I was hoping, crossing my fingers, this was going to do something for the game. Fallout, the board game, is the game I'm talking about from Fantasy Flight Games, and it came out to very mixed thoughts. You can see it's rated 6.9 overall. It states the best way to play it on Board Game Geek is solo. The community that was surrounding this game really wanted this thing to be a knockout of the park for Fallout from a solo perspective. And it missed the mark just based on the way it was designed. It definitely missed the mark in the way it was designed with other players. And it kind of capped your ability to play it like a Fallout game should be played. In other words, your idea of exploration and moving around, like everything seemed very crunched and very kind of like restricted in terms of what you could do. But what's really cool to see is this expansion drop. And when they announced it, I was excited because I was like, oh, maybe there's a chance it's going to get better. But I can tell you right now, like this is a huge bump up for individuals that have the New California expansion as well. So if you have the base game, New California, and Atomic Bonds, you are sitting pretty from a solo perspective. You will get a lot more enjoyment out of this game now than you did when it was first released. So just so you understand what comes inside of this thing, because it's worth mentioning, seeing is this high up on the list. The Atomic Bonds Cooperative Upgrade Pack for Fallout adds a number of scenarios available to you, are doubling, essentially, because it's going to take a whole bunch of scenarios that you couldn't play before solo. Now you can play them solo. This upgrade pack has everything you need to play competitive scenarios, and from either the core game or the New California, and changes them into cooperative scenarios. Essentially, what's going on there. Rather than struggling against each other, Atomic Bonds lets you and friends travel the wasteland, grab the best gear, push your chosen faction to victory together. Combine that with additional modifications, mutations, workshop upgrades. So it literally allows you the freedom to play Fallout like you'd expect to play Fallout on a tabletop. And that's, I think, what everyone wanted when it first came out. But the cool thing is, I know for a fact they were not planning on dropping. There's no way they were planning on dropping this as an expansion like Fantasy Flight may typically do by breaking up some of their product. This was like a patch for the game for them. This was like, how do we make this better? This is a weak point in the game that we can turn around. And I truly believe they actually put some serious effort into making that thing work. And I'm going to go ahead and just say this is a high recommendation from me. If you ditch the Fallout base game in New California, or maybe you didn't even try New California, get those 3 back to your table again and give them a shot. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised from a solo perspective. And last but not least, we have FFG sitting on top of the expansion King of the Hill battle with Marvel Champions, the card game, The Rise of Red Skull. Now, the one thing you'll notice here is that this is for an LCG, first off. And I mentioned earlier with Arkham, I kind of bundled everything into one submission. For Marvel Champions, there are more submissions out there than just this one. So you could technically lump all the expansions into this top submission and basically say Marvel Champions wins the day in terms of the expansions that came out. And that'd be perfectly fine too. But this one specifically was the one that was voted on by the solo community as being the expansion of the year. So that's saying something. And honestly, this Marvel thing is taken off pretty awesomely. And they're doing a great job creating content for this thing at a good pace. and also just releasing some exciting stuff. And it's funny because around the time that this thing actually landed for me, I was actually watching, doing a full watch through of all the Marvel movies from the MCU from in chronological order. So I was right in this window of time when this thing popped onto my doorstep. I was like, yes, this is perfect. So yeah, it's a great choice. I can't even argue this one. It's a great choice. So if you are not into an LCG and maybe you look at Lord of the Rings or maybe you look at Arkham Horror and you go, there is a ton of content. Like I can't catch up to that. I'd be like emptying my wallet on the floor at this point and just hoping that it works for me. Marvel's not too far out the door yet. So you can find the packs of cards that you need and you can get the expansions, and you could get them all right now and you wouldn't have too much trouble at all. If you wait too much longer though, this thing's going to become problematic later on. So do your best to try to get in on subscriptions for this game if you're interested in Marvel. Of course you have to like the IP, because if you don't like superheroes or just the IP, or maybe you're burnt out on that, don't do this. Like, you have to like the gameplay is well done. The designing of the game and the scenarios are well done. But if you don't like the IP, just move on. It'll save you some grief, because you can't force yourself to like a theme that you don't like. So don't just do it because, oh, it landed at the top of this list. Do it because you want to play it. And there's 20 other games that I just listed out that are also fantastic to check out. So this list, I hope at the end of all this craziness that it helps you. It helps you to make decisions on which games or which expansions might suit your fancy. But long story short, don't buy everything. Do your research, as I always tell you to do, and pick the things that actually speak to you the most. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. There'll be more list videos to come as the year ends off and even moving into the new year. I've got some interesting ideas in my mind here. So thank you guys. Appreciate it. I'll see you in the next one. And as always, keep on rolling solo.